The title of my talk suggests, I think there's a connection between motorcycling and metaphors. And before you ask why motorcycling, why not deep sea diving in metaphors or something like this, let me tell you why I'm motorcycling. About 16 years ago, I lived in Pennsylvania, the lovely state of Pennsylvania, in a small town called Selinsgrove, just north of Harrisburg, about 2 hours west of Philadelphia. You can see the state capital there. I lived just north of that. I was teaching at Susquehanna University in the English department at the time. And there I had a colleague named Drew, whom I had befriended. Drew was a avid cyclist, a bicyclist, and a bit of a gearhead. And one day he saw me in the hall and asked me if I would teach him how to ride a motorcycle. Well, the reason he asked me was because I rode my motorcycle everywhere, and I think he assumed that, well, he must, he knows how to ride, he must also know how to teach someone to ride, which is exactly what I assumed as well. What Drew didn't know was that I actually had been riding a motorcycle for a long, long time. In fact, my motorcycle career went back to, started when I was about 5 years old. And on this machine, some of you might recognize, it's a Honda Z50 from about 1970, and I spent a lot of time on it. At the time, I was living in Iran, on an Air Force base, and my dad was a fighter pilot. So, as any, I think, child of a fighter pilot might do, I was airborne mostly with this poor thing, which destroyed its suspension and all kinds of parts and everything. But crucially, it taught me a lot of fundamental skills about riding, namely throttle control and balance and coordination and traction control and so on. And of course, my dad would encourage all of this. But something else was going on in the 70s as well, also tied to this bike, incidentally. There was a whole campaign to get us riding, even halfway across the world, right? And I think I fell completely for this propaganda. The campaign was to suggest that motorcycling was fun and accessible, and in fact even necessary, even if you were going to the beach, for instance. So at about 10 years old, if you had asked me at 10 years old by the end of the 1970s, if motorcycling was going to be a part of my life, I would say absolutely, that this was the only through line in my life, right? All right, at 10, then the Iranian Revolution broke out, and my family and I moved to California. And of course, I couldn't ride then, but I had to wait till I got my license, and as soon as I did, I was on this thing, an MD5, soon to be followed by a number of different motorcycles. You'll see different versions of me. This is me on a CT90. Then came this phase this is my mod phase on a Vespa. Then followed this kind of rockabilly phase on a CT550. And by about the time I had met Drew, I had gone through a dozen of these motorcycles, phases, cruiser style type things. And I had tried on, I think, the same number of personalities as well, right? So about 2000, this brings us up to about 2003 or so, when I'm beginning to teach Drew how to ride a motorcycle. And in my garage in Pennsylvania live these two bikes. This is a Kawasaki Zephyr, it's a 750, and this bike, a completely restored Honda 450 from 1972, which I was really proud of. Now, the difference between the bike you're looking at, the one on the right, and the one Drew actually got on was the front brakes. Namely, this has front brakes, and the one Drew rode did not have front brakes. I can't believe I'm saying this. And the issue was this. I was trying to restore this bike, and it was in pieces just a few weeks before I decided to teach Drew how to ride a bike, and I just didn't have time to put the whole thing back together. Right? So feverishly, I got the bike back together the week before I was going to teach Drew how to ride, and well, the front brake just never made it back on the bike. Right? And you know, I didn't think a whole lot about this because I knew that the front brake was, well, it's a pretty complex thing to try to master as a novice rider, and I thought, you know what, it might actually be a good thing that he doesn't have a front brake. To make a long story short, Drew arrived one Saturday about 5 or 6 in the evening, and I showed him this bike, minus the front brake, and oriented him to the controls, the throttle on the right side, the clutch on the left, gear shift on the left with the left foot, rear brake with the right foot, and so on. And he seemed to be okay with it, so we proceeded to go down the street, stopping, using the clutch, shifting, and all that kind of stuff. The other thing that hadn't occurred to me was, well, our street would soon end. Right? So I hadn't quite thought through this whole thing. And it did. And where it ended was kind of unfortunate because it was the only busy street in Selinsgrove. Now we had 3 options, as I could tell. One was to make a U-turn. One was to cross 2 lanes of traffic and make a left turn, or to make a right turn. And of the 3 options, I decided the right turn was the best one to take for us. So I instructed Drew to make a right turn, and he attempted to make a right turn. And I say attempted because he did something very predictable, which happens to a novice rider, namely that they go wide when they make turns. And Drew did end up going wide, and he ended up in oncoming traffic, and with the throttle fully open, and began to get involved in a game of chicken with a car that was coming at him at high speeds. Now, imagine I'm watching this whole thing transpire, and in the few seconds that I had to kind of just review what was happening, I thought to myself, I have put someone who doesn't know how to ride a motorcycle on a bike with no front brakes, no skill, and he's about to get killed, and it's on me. And I can't really fully describe the feeling to you. In fact, I haven't really talked about this ever. But it was kind of it's like this feeling of your heart just coming out of your chest, right? And I don't know how this all happened or how he managed to get himself out of this disaster. But at the very last second, Drew swerved to the right. The car swerved to their right, so they crashed up and onto the sidewalk, and the 2 of them missed each other from my vantage point by maybe mere inches, right? Well, Drew, I think he was in a state of shock or something, so he held onto the throttle. He maintained his throttle, so I chased back behind him down this main road in Selinsgrove, and finally we came to a stop, and he breathed, and we got the bike back home, and I don't think we ever talked about it again. This is really a good thing. So that ended that chapter of my life. I'll fast forward to 2005 when I moved to Oregon. At the time I was writing a memoir about my time in Iran and so on, and I was looking for something on the side to do. And I discovered this organization called Team Oregon, and it happened to be the premier motorcycle training program in the nation. So I looked into how to become an instructor, ostensibly because I wanted a part-time job and I wanted a little diversion from all the time you spend in front of the computer when you're writing a book. But really it was to make amends for something I had done. I almost killed a friend, and I wanted to correct that. 10 years later, by about 2015, I had taught 2,000 riders in Oregon. I'm glad to say none of them faced the kind of disaster Drew faced. All of them were equipped with front brakes. Very proud of that. And by then I joined the management team, and soon I became the director of this organization. And to give you a glimpse of what this organization is all about, we train 10,000 riders a year. It involves 200 instructors across the state, 30 different sites at which training happens, 500 vehicles that we manage. It's a big operation. It maintains to be the leader in the country in motorcycle safety. And for me, it always goes back to this one event and how one small pivotal moments in your life can sort of change the trajectory of your life. And here I am leading a motorcycle safety program that was really tied to one misadventure on a Saturday. I promised to talk about some metaphors, so let me do that. The first one is kind of like this. I'll read the last bit of it for you. Or maybe I could come up here and pull it. That's easy. No, it's not good. Anyway, these are lessons in motorcycling, but I think they are also good life lessons, so I want to share a few of them with you. Don't practice till you get it right. Do it till you can't get it wrong. The first half says, you show promise. The second half says, you're reliable. If you're on this side of graduation in high school, it also means you can answer a few homework problems, but can you do the test? In motorcycling, it also means the difference between life and death. Here's another one. Line selection has irrevocable downstream consequences. So I should think about that for a moment, because I brought this graphic to show you what I'm talking about. So one of the lines is pretty dim. It's a yellow line on the inside of the other two, but you can see three different lines here. One of them is pretty disastrous, the thin one that goes off the road. The dotted one, the broken one, is okay, except it gets pretty close to the edge up on top. The black one happens to be the best one. The point isn't which line to take. The point is that your line selection really matters in motorcycling, right? When I think about this and how I apply this to life, and it comes up constantly for me, is how I start projects. Whether or not I read the manual, for instance, before I start to put together that IKEA cabinet, right? Or how you start a conversation. The first few words seem to affect the outcome of a conversation, or a meeting, or an interaction. The last one I'll share with you is look all the way through the turn, by which I mean here's a rider coming to a turn and seeing if he can look at the exit all the way through. The issue here is most fatalities in motorcycling, almost half of them are tied to single vehicle crashes where no other vehicles involved, and it's primarily turns. That the rider goes into it too fast, not having checked out the entire arc of the turn. Now it's easy to say look all the way through the turn, but when you put some trees in here, you can see the problem, right? You can't sometimes see all the way through the turn. How I apply this to life is, of course, to think about the turn as some kind of metaphor for the sort of transitions in life, high school or marriage or aging or, I don't know, retirement or something, and seeing if we can see all the way through it before we engage these things. I'll let you think about some of these things. Thank you for listening to me. I hope to see you in the afterward.